Welcome to episode 113 of the Girl About the Globe podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing Tracy McHugh on solo road tripping and solo travel in the USA. If you've ever wanted to travel domestically around the USA or are flying in internationally, this episode is for you. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Girl About the Globe, a podcast for you, the solo female traveller, empowering women to travel solo with maximum adventure, minimum impact. Welcome to another episode of the Girl About the Globe podcast. Today I am joined by Tracy McHugh. Tracy is a blogger at Chasing Wonderful and was featured on the Mind Body podcast. Tracy has been to 47 of the 50 states and joins me today to talk about solo travel in the USA. Welcome, Tracy.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, I'm really excited because I don't know much about the USA, to be honest. So I'm really excited about talking to you and learning a bit more about it. But
Nice. Well, hopefully I can fill in some of the gaps.
yeah, I'm sure you're going to. But before we start talking about traveling in the US, can you tell us a little bit more about you, such as when you first started solo traveling and what is your normal traveling style?
Sure. So I was born and raised in the US. I am from New Jersey originally, and I actually started solo traveling pretty young. I was right out of college, 22, and
Oh,
this was the early 2000s, and this was a little bit before, influencers and solo traveling was as, hip and cool. People had phones, mobile phones, but they didn't have smartphones and the ease of access. So I started traveling before I had a mobile device that could give me directions or pull up information really quickly. It was just kind of like I had to do a little bit more planning. And yeah, so I started right around that time, when I was 22. And the reason I did it was because I was supposed to take a class in Dublin, Ireland. And so I put the deposit and I bought my flights, and then they canceled the course. So I still had my flights to Europe. And I remember, that 22-year-old mind of like, I don't know what to do. And Fred said, well, why don't you just take a trip instead if you already had the flights? And I was like, I could do that. And I didn't know anybody at the time who could take a 2-month trip. So I was like, I guess I'm doing this by myself. And yeah, took 2 months traveling around Ireland and 11 other countries, 14 cities, and then came back to the US and started a real life.
amazing. Yeah, 2 months is quite a long time, isn't it, for someone to join you on a 2-month trip?
Yeah, it was a little bit too much to ask friends at that time. We were all young and most people just didn't have the money or the resources to do it. And then my parents' age, they were still working. So it would have been difficult for them to take off, my parents' generation at the time to take off 2 months. So I was just kind of like, okay,
And
guess this is on me.
yeah, and how did you find it? Was it before you went, were you nervous and a bit scared? And how did you find it when you were on the trip?
I to begin with, I was a little bit nervous because I had been out of the country a couple times at that point, but not really. Um, and I picked Europe one because I had the flights to Europe, but I figured it would be as long as I wasn't talking, I could fit in pretty easily in Europe. So I was like, maybe that'll help me. And when I wasn't talking, people would ask me for directions, and I kept having to say, I have no idea where I am. All the time. So I guess I did fit in okay without speaking and hearing my very New Jersey accent.
But Dublin is so friendly though, isn't it? I think Ireland, the Irish, they talk and talk and talk and they're just so friendly.
Yeah, we had people come up to us once and say, "Are you lost? Do you need directions?" And I'm from the New York City metro area. People just don't do that, So I was like, "Yes, we are lost, and yes, we do need directions."
Oh, that's good. So that was your very first time solo traveling.
Yes, yeah, that was my first time, but definitely not my last. Most of my trips few have been with friends and relatives, but most of my trips have been just me wandering around somewhere.
And you've been to 47 of the states, and there are 50 states in total. Is that right?
Yes,
That is a
yeah.
lot. That's a lot of the states. That's nearly all of them. So which ones were your favorites for solo travelers?
I I think it depends. It depends on the person. I am much more of a city person.
Hmm.
I like cities. I like to sprinkle it in with like a beach or a more scenic, relaxed place. But my MO is usually to go to a city. So when I'm in different countries, I usually pick the metro area. One, because it's easier to get around. That's usually where the airports are, the international airports.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say that, I think because of logistics, like the New York, San Francisco's, Miami's, Los Angeles are just easier to get around. And they have more public transportation. It's easier to get like Ubers or Lyfts, things like that. A lot of, major sites that people think about are in those
Yeah.
major cities. But then there's just some scenic places that are, you shouldn't be missing. Like the Grand Canyon is not in a city, it's in the middle of nowhere, Arizona. One of my favorite places in the US that I visited, and I tend to not visit the same place twice because I like to go to new places, but
Good.
Montana, like
Oh,
Bozeman and Big Sky, Montana. And I've traveled there by myself and felt just as comfortable, in a rural area as I did in a city. A lot of times when you're traveling by yourself, you think safety in numbers. If you're in the city, there's just a lot of people around within shouting distance. When you're in the rural area of the US, it's few and far between, but there's not been a place that I felt, uncomfortable or, just stay away from or, things like that.
that's really interesting because when you think about the US, the places that I've gone to are the touristy places like New York, LA, San Francisco, Miami. So Montana wouldn't even be on my radar. I wouldn't even know what's in Montana. So that's really great that you've explored that area as well and you recommend that area for solo travelers.
Yeah, and it depends on, like I said earlier, the type of person you are. There are some people who, are more they like the hiking and the skiing
Mm.
or, more of those outdoor activities. I wouldn't necessarily recommend the cities for those, if you're a nature sort of person, you would want to go to the Montanas or the Idahos or, places like that. If you're more like me and you like the hustle and bustle of the city or a lot of the, tourist attraction. Like, I went to Paris and I wanted to see the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower. You're not going to necessarily find that on, the coastal towns in a lot of these countries. So.
And something that I wasn't aware of when I first went to the US is just how many national parks it has and how good it is for hiking.
Oh yeah, ton. Because there's those major cities we're talking about,
Yeah.
but the rest of the country is like very rural or suburban. You have these few major cities, but once you like leave the East Coast or West Coast and you're in the middle of the country, you could go for hundreds of miles and not. I remember driving off of Route 80 in Utah and like there was an exit and I didn't see what they were exiting to. There was no buildings, no gas stations. It's like there's just so much open land in the middle of the country. So there are just a ton of national parks and everywhere but those major cities you think of in the US.
Would you say that you do need a car to get around a lot of the states, or is it possible? Obviously, if you're doing the city and sightseeing part of it, then you said you've got the public transport. But if you go into the rural places, would you really need to hire a car? Or it depends.
Yeah, yeah, so in the major cities, you can pretty much get around either by bus, train, or Uber or something like that. A lot of the other places are getting better with, Ubers and Lyfts, but a lot of times there's like so much space between each city. So I would recommend either hiring a car to drive you around or, getting your own rental car and anywhere but those major cities. And if you're in those major cities, I recommend you don't get a rental car. It's just chaotic. Parking is usually very expensive and it's not worth the time or headache. I've driven in most of these cities and they are headaches.
And especially if you're coming from England as well, because we kind of drive on the wrong side of the road compared to the rest of the world,
Yeah.
it seems. Yeah, so that
I
extra
did go to Dublin for I think I drove a half a mile and I'm like, I'm confused. This is not gonna end well. I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah, so in the city, stick to the public transport. But I've never taken a road trip across the States, and I know that you have taken so many. So which routes have you taken, and do you have any tips for road tripping?
Sure. So the last one I took last year, I had taken Route 10 from Los Angeles to Florida. So we went through Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, and then, hit Florida. I love that route because one, it was the most direct route to where I was going, but also I got to go to Louisiana and New Orleans, which I hadn't been to before. So that was really cool. I've also taken the northern route that's like through South Dakota, Montana, and I took that from New York over to when I was going to Los Angeles. We took the northern route because we happened to be starting in New York, so we were that north anyway. But that was such a cool route. It was very scenic. That was the first time we had gone to Montana. South Dakota has Mount Rushmore, which is that stone where it's like the four presidents' heads
Hmm.
etched into stone. They also have this other monument similar to that etched into stone called Crazy Horse. So there's like,
Oh,
even though it's not what you think of, when you think of the US, there was a lot of like scenic beauty there and stops along the way. So I would have to say that that was probably one of my favorite routes that we did. We went to Utah and then we stopped to cut down to Los Angeles. We stopped in Las Vegas for 2 nights because my dad hadn't been to Las Vegas since the 60s. And I said it changed quite a bit since the 60s. So it was a cool
often,
route
yeah.
for us to stop.
And Route 66 has got to be the most famous route, I think, that people think of with the USA. If you could name, say, a top three for your routes, would it be the ones that you just mentioned? So was it Route 10? Was that the first one you said?
So there's a lot. My first road trip that I took from New Jersey to Los Angeles, I didn't realize that there were interstates because I was 22 and that's not something that I was thinking about. But there's these interstates like Route 10 is an interstate, Route 80 is an interstate, Route 40 is an interstate, and they go from the East Coast to the West Coast. There's usually a lot more lanes on those highways. They're not, it's a highway interstate, so it's not going through local roads. You can usually do faster speeds as opposed to if you're going through just these little towns and side roads, it's just a slower speed. So you can't go as fast. It's like, a lot more mountainous at times. So I would say probably just, depending on where you're starting and where you're ending, trying to find a interstate to go on for either most of it or all of it is probably helpful.
And do you have any tips for taking a road trip in regards to filling up fuel, or you call it gas, don't you?
Yeah, but you can call it fuel as well. Yeah, I knew what you're saying. So I'd probably recommend two things that I noticed is always make sure your cell phone is charged and always make sure that you have enough gas and really be mindful of signs like, gas station 20 miles or gas station 50 miles and seeing what your gas tank is at. Because I had times, like I said, in the middle of the US, it can be 50, 100, 150 miles before you hit the next stop. So a lot of times when you're on the East Coast between Boston and New York or New York and DC, it's very congested. So you'll see a gas station every mile or every couple of miles. But when you go to the middle of the country, it genuinely could be a really long time before you find anything else. So I've done a few of those drives and I've done it by myself. So I always had to be mindful of like, I can't walk 75 miles to go pick up gas and then walk it back to my rental car. So be mindful of that. Make sure your cell phone is charged, but sometimes that doesn't even matter because, in these rural areas, sometimes there's no cell towers. So your cell phone actually may not work. So that's why you really need to be mindful of gasoline because like you could run out of gas and then you can't even call somebody to say, hey, I'm stuck here, like AAA, which is a roadside assistance in the US.
Okay, that's handy to know. I was going to ask if there's what the roadside assistance would be as well, especially if you're by yourself. It just gives you that peace of mind, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I have this membership to AAA. So you could, if you have like with somebody you're with or yourself, you could call AAA. The next best thing would just, if you're really stranded and you don't have AAA, just call 911, which is the emergency assistance. And then they would ask you if this is, an active emergency, like a shooting or something along those lines, they would ask you what type of emergency you're in, and then they would just direct you according to, if it's really like, I don't know what to do, that would be 911 on your cell phone.
Okay. Changing the subject a little bit, because I know that you have a background in travel and tourism, and you have a lot of expertise on LA, Miami, and New York. What do you think the appeal of these cities are to women?
There's just a lot to do and there's a lot of variety. So when you think of Miami, a lot of people think of it as a party town, which it 100% is. So there's a lot of bars and clubs, they're open late. But it also has such like beautiful places to go, like botanical gardens, or the beaches are gorgeous. So while I had people visiting me, I would take them to these hot spots that they would think of with Miami, but I was also taking them to the off the beaten path. And that's what I would do with people in New York and people in Los Angeles as well. I would take them to the few things like in LA, the Hollywood Walk of Fame and the handprints and things like that. But I would only spend a few minutes there. But was I taking them to like, hole in the wall play restaurants and, places that more locals were going to? Because that's what I enjoy when I go to a city. When I went to Paris or London, all these iconic buildings are amazing. But I also want to see, what are the British actually doing here? What are the French actually doing here? And I think my favorite day in Paris was, yes, I love the Louvre, I love the Eiffel Tower, but my favorite day in Paris was when I just wandered the streets, stopped in a random cafe. That was my favorite part of the trip that I still remember 15 years later. So yeah, I would say, the appeal to these cities that draws people is the fact that, a lot of the major touristy sites are there, but then there's also so much more to do in these cities, in addition to the one thing you may know about it.
And you can also do day trips, I guess, can't you? So I guess from LA, you can do, well, I went down from LA to San Francisco on the Greyhound bus, I think, and stopped off at,
Oh, that's a trip.
yeah, at Monterey.
Yep, yep. So San Francisco to Los Angeles is about a 5 to 6 hour drive. Los Angeles to San Diego is about I would say 2-ish hour drive. But anybody who knows anything about California, those are just windows. It could take that time, or it could take a lot more. And then there's also Palm Springs. That's about a 2 hour drive from Los Angeles. Las Vegas is about a 4 hour drive from Los Angeles. Phoenix is about a 6 hour drive. And then there's also from Miami, kind of like Florida, kind of like California. Florida is a very big state. So it's hard to get at, when you're in Miami, it's, I think, about an 8 hour trip from Miami to get out of the state of Florida. But there's on the East Coast, there's Fort Lauderdale, there was West Palm Beach. Jacksonville is all the way north. There's on the Gulf Coast, there's Naples, and there's Tampa, Sarasota area. And these places just have like amazing beaches. And then I'll never stop talking about the New York City metro area, because these states are so small. So growing up in New Jersey, I could get from where I lived in New Jersey, I could get to Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, and other parts of New Jersey in under an hour.
Wow.
So I could see 4 different states in a whole day, where you're not going to do that in California or Florida. So the Northeast has a really big advantage of these states being tinier. So you being able to hit a lot of different places. Like I could get from New Jersey to DC in 4 hours. I could get to Boston in 4 hours, Philadelphia in 2 hours. So you're hitting a lot of the major cities in half a day. So there's a lot of road trip potential in the Northeast.
Yeah, I didn't realize that actually. And how do you find the safety in some of the bigger cities? And do you have any safety tips for women traveling alone there?
Sure, sure. So obviously that's always been the first and foremost for me, whether I'm domestic or abroad. And my MO for the US is my MO anywhere I go. I'm just smart about things. If I usually am not the person who carries a handbag with me, but if I am, I'm not just flinging it over the chair. I either have it on my lap or it's very close in front of me where I can see it. I'm just mindful of things. I'm not a super big drinker, but especially if I'm traveling, I'm watching my drink, I'm watching my food. I'm not just, carelessly getting up and leaving and coming back. I also ask at the hotels I'm staying at, is it safe to go here? I'm thinking about going there, asking a local who probably will know the area better than I do.
That's a great
So
tip. Yeah.
the same thing that I practice anywhere I go, I practice in the US. And I have never had an issue in my life of anything stolen, being attacked, anything like that. And that's domestically, and that's also abroad, because I'm just super vigilant of who's around me. And I think being from the New York City metro area, you can size people up pretty quickly. So if I can usually tell in a few seconds if somebody seems off, and I usually remove myself from that situation immediately. So I think it's just being hyper aware and, not letting your guard down. And I don't mean in a you can never speak to anybody, because I've had some amazing trips where I've connected with somebody on an excursion I'm in. So it's just being to identify who you're speaking with. Not everybody is out to hurt you or out to attack you. And if you don't speak to anybody, it's going to take away from the experience you're having. Some of my favorite times have been with the people that I've randomly connected with on trips that were, doing the same day tour I was doing or excursion. And I would have been sad if I didn't have those.
Yeah, I think your instinct kicks in as well when you solo. You just become extra vigilant and you can feel when something's not quite right and something's a bit off.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, 100%. I had that once in Warsaw, Poland. There was this man standing on the other side of the room, and I was like, there's something just not right. Like, I don't speak Polish. I don't know what's going on, but something's just off. And you just, anywhere you are, whether it's New York, Warsaw, London, I think people have usually pretty good intuition on. And even if you're wrong, better to be safe than sorry, right? Like, if you
Yeah.
don't feel comfortable, that's still valid. So.
Yeah, exactly. Great pieces of advice. So when you worked in the travel and tourism industry, you stayed in 300 hotels?
Yes. So I had a job when I was
Amazing.
working for Marriott where I was traveling around for 6 months, and I was a training manager. So I had to go to hotels and train them on different systems and procedures that we were doing. And so within that 6 months, I was just under 300 hotels. I was doing about 2 to 3 hotels a day. I literally slept in a new hotel every single night for 6 months. I gave up my apartment. My mailing address was whatever hotel I was in that night. My parents thought I was crazy, but it was the my favorite job I've ever had and most fun experience, because somebody was paying me to travel around the U.S. I mean, what could be worse than that? So that was
Yeah, perfect job.
yeah, so it was pretty awesome, and I got to see a lot of amazing things. They sent me to some places I had been to before, but I didn't see that as a lost opportunity. I could just see some things that I loved, catch up with people I knew, things like that. So it was a really cool experience for me.
Oh, it sounds great. Because one of the questions that we get in our Facebook community, because we've got women from all around the world there, they always ask for recommended accommodation. They generally want to stay somewhere where they know another solo female traveler has stayed, I think
Mm,
for safety. Do you have
sure.
any tips on what women should look for in accommodation and any particular chains that you would recommend?
Sure. So I started working hotels very early in my career. So I tend to be a hotel person when I travel. I know a lot of people who've stayed in Airbnbs or vacation rentals or things like that, which I think people have had great experience in. So I am not bashing that route either. I just tend to go for hotels. I worked with Hilton and Marriott. But I think that there's a lot of great brands out there. I don't know all of like the European ones or different countries, but those are two great brands. IHG is a great brand. There's just a lot of, and what I like about these places that they're reputable. So like if something's wrong with your room, you can rectify it at the front desk, or gonna solve the problem, give you a new room, fix whatever happened. So I like that about it. So that it's not like I'm going into somebody's, private room and like they may be shady and be like, not my problem. Like if you stay at one of these big brands and something's wrong, they're gonna fix a problem. So I like that. I also like I was never comfortable with hostels. That was just me. So I would always try to find more economical hotels or motels. That was just my comfort zone. I've known people to stay in hostels and had great experiences. That just wasn't, I always say, just play into what makes you feel comfortable. Because yes, hostels are very inexpensive, but some of these brands that I mentioned, they have a variety of different brands. So you can say from the Town Place Suites, which is a very economical Marriott, all the way to the Ritz-Carlton, which is a very luxurious brand.
Mm.
So it's kind of got a budget for most people. So that's also what I like about a lot of these major brands. You don't always have to stay in a room that's, 600 US dollars a night. You can find one that's maybe 100 US dollars a night, or, depending on the city or the state or the country.
And they also have loyalty programs, don't they? Are those the ones that you can actually get points and then you can book through your points as well?
Exactly, exactly. So I have that for Marriott and Hilton. I'm not as familiar with IHG and some of the other ones, but I have Marriott reward points and Hilton loyalty points. I'm actually going to stay in a hotel in Los Angeles on the points that I've accumulated. And it's similar to a lot of these big brands. Starbucks does it, Dunkin' Donuts does it. Like a lot of these big chains have these loyalty programs that will give you free rewards after like X amount of dollars. So yeah, so that's also another benefit to it. Sometimes they'll have programs where, if you stay enough, you could maybe get free breakfast. It may not be a free hotel room, but it could be like a free breakfast or something like that. So there can be a lot of different perks for, staying at the same brand, especially if you're staying, traveling a lot. When I was traveling a lot for work, I accumulated a lot of points. So it
Imagine.
helped me with like rental cars, and it helped me with hotel rooms and things like that to be able to in the future then get free stays or free things out of it.
And are they quite easy to find if you're doing road trips? Those particular hotels on the route. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I love about like Hilton's, Marriott's, and those bigger brands. You're pretty much going to find one of them virtually anywhere in the US. You'll probably find the luxury brands in more of the cities. So, like the Waldorf Astorias, the Four Seasons, the Ritz-Carltons, they'll probably be either in a major city or in a very scenic area like Aspen, Colorado, that's big for skiing. But they're tinier brands like the Town Place Suites or the Hampton Inns, which are their more select service, or just for people who are taking the road trips and, just need a place off the highway to rest their head for a couple hours and then leave. You'll find those virtually at almost every stop you pass. So one of the, Courtyards, Town Place Suites, Residence Inns, Hampton Inn and Suites, Fairfield, you'll find pretty much these virtually anywhere you go.
And to start accumulating your points, I guess you just book with the hotel and then you.
Yep. So the first thing you would go on their website, you would create an account like the Hilton Honors account or Marriott Rewards account. And then once you were signed into your account, you would start booking. And once you have stayed at the hotel and, stayed that night, you'll start seeing the points accumulate on your account. And then you can also, there's on the websites, there's a way that you can hit a button that says, pay with cash or pay with points, and then it'll show you how many points you need for each of the hotels you're looking at.
Okay, cool. Obviously, you don't work for these brands, but they're the two of the brands.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that you recommend. And do they have any evening entertainment, or when you were by yourself, did you find things to do in the evening as a solo?
Yeah, so I'm like I said to you earlier, I'm much more of a more early morning person. So I'm not going to be the person staying out till all hours of the evening. But yeah, I mean, depending on where I was, there are sometimes like I would try to find like one of my favorite memories when I was in Washington, D.C., the Kennedy Center, which is a huge venue in Washington, D.C., was having the American Ballet perform to Beatles music and the Rolling Stones. And so like I try to find things like that I really enjoy. I love the theater. It's one of my favorite things. I grew up outside of Broadway. So I mean, I just love the arts. I love the theater. So I always recommend just think about what you like to do and then just start searching it for that city. So for me, it's theater. Most of these places have a lot of, sporting venues. Like New York has the Yankees and the Mets and the Rangers and hockey, baseball, soccer, anything you could think of. So if you're a sports person, just Googling that, or if you're a theater person, even if you're not in New York City seeing Broadway, most places even have regional theaters. So I was in, I think it was Charleston once, and I did a ghost tour one evening. So I
Oh,
just
great.
for the things that I enjoy to do. I think that I do that a lot. And then also I try to find really good restaurants. I'm a big into trying the local cuisine. So I'm not the person who's going to be going to the Ruby Tuesdays or, those type of places every single place I go. I'm trying to find what are people who live here eating at. And that's where I usually try to go, whether it's in the US or whether it's internationally. So those are some of the big things. With I also tried to do excursions. One of my favorite excursions in Panama was doing this day excursion to one of the islands off the coast of Panama. And I actually got to meet a lot of people that way. So there was like 8 of us on this excursion. And by the end of it, end of the 12 hours, we were all chummy and, exchanging social media. So I think that's also a good way to, do something you enjoy and meet people in the process.
Yeah, definitely loads of ideas there for what to do in the evenings when you're by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any destination in the US that most people miss, but you think is perfect for solos, like a hidden gem in the country that you stumbled across?
Yeah, I think for me, it would probably be the places that are off the beaten path. So a lot of times people go to places because of time or money. So for instance, when I went to Panama and Colombia, the reason why I picked there is because I hadn't been to Central or South America yet. It was only a 6-hour flight from me. So that was kind of, I picked that destination because of logistics. But yeah, so I think people, should pick an area that like logistically makes sense for them. Because it may not only be cost effective, it could be time effective. Sometimes you're like, I only have a week. Well, if you only have a week, do you want to fly, for 800 hours? No, you probably want a place that's a little bit closer. So I would say, that would be the first thing to look at. And then just really identify if you're looking for more of a fast-paced city feel, or if you're looking for more of a beach feel, or if you're looking for more of nature, because there's so much different climates and diversity in the US that I would pick what type of vibe you're going for. Because I've had times where I'm like, I just need to lay on a beach or like lay in a lounge chair. And then I've had other times where I think I'm going to get so bored if I'm just laying down for a week. So I would say that those are probably, more important keys than, yeah, some of the great places in the US, we were kind of chatting about before of, I love Montana, Idaho. There's like some great national parks that I think sometimes people miss because they're just thinking of New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco. But yeah, I think a lot depends on just people's, how much time, money, what they're looking for to do in this trip is, because you can find it all in the US.
Especially if you live in the US as well and you're just looking to travel domestically, you could just maybe
Exactly.
go to a neighboring state and see something a bit different, I guess.
Yeah, I did that all the time.
And RVing, is that how you say it? When you have,
RV.
yeah, that's a really big thing now, isn't it? A lot of women are just taking an RV and just going off exploring.
Yeah, I have not done it, but there's something, a company called Cruise America, and I'm sure there's a lot of similar different, but like if you don't own an RV, but you want to go RVing, there's a lot of similar companies to Cruise America where you can rent an RV, different size RVs, depending on who you're going with. And you can rent them for, a few days, a week, or however long you're going for. So there's definitely a lot of different options. I've never done that because then I would have to drive the RV. But I don't know if I want to drive something that big.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does seem like a cool enough concept because you can kind of like, stop where you want to stop, relax, have all your stuff in the area in this one area, not worried about like, taking it from hotel to hotel or Airbnb. So
Yeah, freedom.
Yeah. That's and then also if you have pets, right? A lot of times
Mm.
if you have a dog that you want to take with you, it's a lot easier to have an RV and just have the dog, in the back and, stop when the dog needs to go to the bathroom or whatever, as opposed to you can take dogs to hotels. Certain hotels will be pet friendly. And I know this because I have a cat. And so when I've moved, I've had to take her. I would never leave her, but so I took her to these different hotels and had to pay a pet deposit for the cleaning because having a pet in the room. And so I think she stayed in more hotels than many adults have stayed in. So
Wow.
I think my cat's been to about 26 states. So she's pretty well traveled.
Did she get the points?
I'm paying, so I get the points, but she gets an extra tuna can. So.
And you mentioned before about time and distance. So where would you recommend for a week or a 2 week vacation?
Sure. So again, that totally depends on where you're coming from and your mode
Yeah,
of
true.
transportation. If you're driving or if you're flying, those are things to think about. But like the other day, I had gone to visit my uncle in Asheville, North Carolina, and I actually drove from just outside the Tampa area, and I drove from my house to his house in Asheville, North Carolina, and that was about with stopping. I think that was just a little over like 10 hours in each direction. So there's a lot of different options. It just depends on, how you want to get there. Um, but yeah, so I think regionally really matters. Like I only had a few days to travel when I traveled to Asheville. I knew I wanted to drive. So I knew that like, California or the West Coast was probably out of the cards for me because to drive to California, you can do it in probably 4 or 5 days, if you're rushing it, but if you want to take your time, because it's technically driving straight, they say it's about 44 hours from the East Coast to the West Coast. So I don't know anybody who's
Wow.
driven completely straight. I'm sure you can, but you still have to stop for gas and food and bathroom time. But yeah, so it's definitely very regionally. I would recommend, if it's driving, sticking regionally. If you're flying, then that kind of opens you up because it's about a 5 to 6 hour flight from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Okay, that's interesting. The distance is, yeah, 44 hours. That's crazy.
Yeah, it can be a long drive. I have done that drive at this point 5 different times in 5 different routes in my life. So I think we varied between like doing it in 6 days and doing it in 9 days. So, a few trips we spaced it out a little bit. A few trips we just kind of were doing what we needed to do to get to the other side.
You now live in Florida, you mentioned, didn't you? What drew you to Florida?
I have family down here. So I was living in California for the last 8 years, Los Angeles, kind of close to West Hollywood and Beverly Hills. And all of my family lives on the East Coast. My brother lives in New Jersey. I have family in New York and then North Carolina, and my parents live in Florida, split their time. So that's ultimately what brought me back, just to be a little bit closer to family, because like I said, it's very hard to just drive from the West Coast to the East Coast. And then if you're flying, it's a whole day trip of, getting to the airport, getting on the plane, getting from the airport in your destination. So it just became very long days when I wanted to visit family. So I was like, let's just make the trip easier for myself.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And because you've traveled extensively, is there anywhere that you would avoid in the US?
For me, not because of safety or anything like that. The places that I tend not to go back to are places that I've, been to frequently or been to recently. So I just went on that trip to Asheville. So I probably won't go to Asheville for my next couple trips. I'll probably pick other places because I very much like to pick new destinations. In my view, time and money is limited. So I'd rather see as many places as I can and spread the wealth, so to speak. So yeah, so not because of safety in any place I don't feel comfortable going or I've had a horrible time in,
Okay, that's
just
good.
places that I've been to frequently. Like I've saturated the New York City area. I love New York, and if I'm going to see a friend there, cool. I'm happy to visit, but it's not something where I'm like, oh, I missed something in New York or I haven't seen sites or things like that.
What would you say to someone who's looking to explore the US alone for the first time and they are unsure about it, whether it's domestically or they're coming from overseas?
Sure, sure. I have had a lot of people who are coming from overseas say, like, oh, I heard the US is not really safe. Like we were chatting about before, I think you always just need to be vigilant regardless of where you are. I have never had one issue in any place that I've been to in the US, but I've always been very mindful of, I'm not getting super intoxicated. I'm not just leaving my bag with things around. Also, one thing that I keep in mind, if am going someplace where I have to travel with a passport, I also have a US license. So I, travel with my passport to get into the country, but then I always put that passport in a safe in the hotel. I'm not walking the streets with it because I can't leave the country if I don't have my passport. So if somebody needs to ID me to see if I'm over, 21 or whatever the legal drinking age is, I'll just show them my US license, to verify my age. So things like that, I'm just very, mindful of how I travel and, where I am, who I'm speaking with, things like that. So there's not a place I would say don't go to or avoid. I would just say wherever you're going, just making sure you're being mindful and ask the people around you. I went to Tijuana a few years ago, and the
Mm.
hotel I was staying at, I said to them, I wanted to go here. Is there anything I need to know or anything I should be aware about? Is this a safe area? So just ask the questions that are on the back of your mind and don't, you're probably not going to see these people again. So don't be like, oh, embarrassed or should I ask them this? Just
Yeah.
your safety is the biggest concern. So,
Is that on the border with Mexico?
yep. So that's
Yeah.
on the border of San Diego. It's like the first city over on the other side of Mexico.
And coming from, obviously now I don't live in the UK, but what I've heard about Detroit in America is what I've heard about it. I wouldn't personally go to Detroit, but do you have any experience of that?
I actually went to Detroit for work years ago.
Yeah.
And so it used to, they call it the Motor City. So it used to be a lot of the car manufacturers were in Detroit. And then we've had economical issues, and a lot of those dealerships have closed or manufacturers have closed. So it just wasn't as vibrant as it was because back in the day, there was all these car manufacturers and Motown. So there was these two huge entities that were taking up and really thriving. But then things evolved. Motown moved to Los Angeles, I think, in the 70s. And then, how they make cars and things like that have evolved over the years. So it's just not thriving as it was in, the 60s and 70s. But when I went to Detroit, I had such a great time. Everybody was really friendly and helpful. They actually where Motown used to be, the record studio, they have a museum now. So it was like I did a tour of that. They have really good barbecue. There was a barbecue place not too far from the Motown Museum that I went to. And so there were some cool things to do. And again, scenic. So Detroit's in Michigan. And so there's some great parks there. And it's on the Finger Lakes. And so there's a lot of things you could do up in that region. And then, if you're road tripping, it's pretty close to a few other states on the Finger Lakes that you can head to. So but
Okay.
yep, I didn't feel unsafe when I was in Detroit. And again, just keeping up with those principles of being mindful of what you're doing and where you're going.
It just goes to show, doesn't it, that you just shouldn't listen to the media, which I know anyway, really. But I think
Although
the
I've had that same issue like in other places. So, I've heard when I went to Thailand, I've heard things about Bangkok of being unsafe and you have to be mindful of when you're in Bangkok. And then in Colombia, when I went to Colombia, I went to Cartagena, but I heard things about like Cali and some of the other cities that you have to, just don't go there. And so then I went to Bangkok. I had no issues with Bangkok. I had some of my greatest experiences in Bangkok. Saw some amazing temples, connected with some cool people, and it was just like such a great experience. And I have to keep reminding myself of like, we all have to do what's within our means and our comfort zone, but then also just blocking out the external noise because everybody's going to have a different opinion. It doesn't necessarily mean it's your opinion. Like somebody may not feel comfortable going to Asia. I do. Um, So yeah, I try to, I'm with you on that. I've been to cities where I've heard this noise and it's kind of impacted me. And then I've gone there and I'm like, why do I listen to people? This was such a cool experience.
Yeah, like I love the Middle East, and a lot of women feel very nervous about coming to the Middle East, but I feel more comfortable in the Middle East than I do in other regions. So it just like you're saying, it kind of depends on, I guess, which area suits you. But I think the most important thing is maybe ask in communities if you're a bit worried about going to a certain country or area, ask if anyone else has been there, and then that's where you get the reassurance of people saying, well, I was there last month and I had the most amazing experience, or I did this and I did this, and then you start to get a different perception of the place that the media feeds you or that you're told about it, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, things are so much easier now. And I'm sure things were a lot more difficult in my parents' generation. But like I said, when I first started traveling, I did not have a smartphone. I didn't have a
Mm.
smartphone where I could look up directions if I'm lost or, calling 911 or like local emergency numbers. I didn't have that. Where now it's like you have this device at your grasp that you could, just solve so many different problems. Or you lost, is something happening that you need to call for emergency? Like it's helpful. Will it solve all your problems? No, but it's definitely a lot more helpful than not having it. So I feel a lot more safe having that where, I've been walking around and I'm like, I have no idea where I am. So I just pull up my map and, I see where I'm at. And then there's also, if you're trying to conserve, and not use your data, you can also download Google Maps and use it offline. So you can still see a map and see yourself in real time, but you're not using your data. So there's so many resources now to kind of get yourself out of little trouble, so to speak.
It is so much easier now because I started solo traveling when I was, 27 years ago,
Mhm.
before phones, like, where you have the massive thick guidebooks that weigh a ton, where you have to
Love.
go into the phone booths and buy international phone cards to phone home, and everyone's in a line, and you have to queue for ages to phone your parents to let them know where you are in the world, and you need proper paper maps. And it's so much easier now to be connected and also to meet other solo travelers from different communities. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, if you get lost, which is my sense of direction is awful. So thank goodness for Google Maps.
You and me both.
So before we start wrapping up, is there anything else that you would like to add about the US or solo traveling in general?
Yeah, just kind of what we've been chatting about. It's just, don't be scared of different places. Just be what you would do in your normal neck of the woods where you're from. Just be mindful. I am not a planner, so I am the person who's usually winging it, but just play into your comfort zone. There are some people who like to travel like myself, who just kind of like to wing it. There are other people who need that outline. So I say, just do whatever makes you comfortable. Listen to other people, but take it with a grain of salt, right? Because like somebody may give you a recommendation and you want recommendations, but that may not be what you're interested in or what works best for you or your time or your budget or things like that. So get opinions and, but work it into what works best for you.
Great advice. And Tracy, where can people go to find out more about you?
Sure, sure. So my blog website is chasingwonderful.com and it has all my social media on there.
Fantastic. It was so good to talk to you today. Thank you. You've actually inspired me to come to the US.
Yeah, and when you come, let me know. Hopefully we can meet up.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much for your time, Tracy, and I wish you every success in the future.
Thanks again.
And you can find out more about Tracy at her blog, Chasing Wonderful. And if this has inspired you to go to the US, there's also an article called Solo Travel in the USA on the Girl About the Globe blog. And I'll be back next week.
Thanks for listening to our Girl About the Globe podcast, making solo travel easier for you. Find everything that you need for your solo travels at girlabouttheglobe.com, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.